shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender.
Welcome to A Radio. I'd like to thank you for joining me on A Radio tonight. I would also like to take the opportunity to take some time to thank Hutch Bailey Jr. for mentioning me on his program Cold War Radio. If you're interested in getting a real feel for what's going on in the US rather than just what's on mainstream media and their perspective, then by all means go to Cold War Radio. You can find it if you can get iHeartRadio. Also, it's available on Spreaker, which is Spreaker, or there are links available on his Facebook page or Twitter. I will put more links on my website so you can find it. Also, you can contact us. Our website is changeontario.wix.com/change. We are also available on Twitter at ChangeOntario. There's a Facebook link on our website. And finally, you can reach us by email at changeontario, all one word, at outlook.com. After that shameless promotion, on with the topic of tonight's show. I want to talk tonight about climate change. It's a very sticky subject in Canada, particularly now that the Liberal Communists are in power. But let's start there. The expression climate change is a metamorphosis of a previous incarnation of what was known as global warming. Remember that? I'm sure everybody remembers global warming. That was when the science and politicians were caught out trying to fudge the figures from a university in the United Kingdom, the University of East Anglia, showing the figures that they uncovered were showing that statistically there was no global warming taking place at all. And when they discovered that, they absolutely freaked out and tried to hide it. And if it wasn't for the fact of people leaking the information, I can't remember what it was at the time, that it would never have been uncovered. Not only that was the information leaked, they were caught trying to alter the information as well. These were supposed scientists, which were really political driven people, were altering the figures to suit their agenda. And that is a disgrace. And really, that's fraud, and they should have been arrested and put in jail. But, because they're communists, because there's communists in Britain as well, kid you not, nothing was ever done about it. In the UK, the government manipulated the media for years, and all the media were talking about at the time was global warming, and the seas were rising, and that within just a few years that most of the southern England was going to be absorbed by the sea, and Britain was doomed, etc., etc. What I want to do now is I want to play a short clip. And this clip is entitled, "On October 14, Lord Christopher Monckton gave a presentation in St. Paul, Minnesota on the subject of global warming." It's a short excerpt from his very long speech, and he issues a dire warning to all Americans regarding the United Nations and the United Nations treaty that was scheduled to be signed in Copenhagen in December 2009. Now, obviously, Obama, being a communist, was very, very much in favour of that. I don't remember what the outcome was, but we're still here, thank God. But basically, you'll hear the words world government. You'll hear one world government. This expression comes up time and time again. One world government. It's not a coincidence. And if what he says comes to pass, it's going to look 1984 look like a tea party. Anyway, so if you listen to Lord Monckton and take him at his word, so he's really pointing out, and if you take him at his word, that this is a scam, and it's really a way of manipulating the countries of the West to pay money to the countries of Africa and other places that are less well developed, and for the benefit of the United Nations, and to move forward with a one world government, which we didn't vote in and will have no power to stop. Anyway, I'm going to play this short clip, and I will be back after the break.
And what are we doing instead? At Copenhagen, this December, weeks away, a treaty will be signed. Your president will sign it. Most of the third world countries will sign it because they think they're going to get money out of it. Most of the left-wing regimes around the world, like the European Union, will rubber stamp it. Virtually nobody won't sign it. I have read that treaty, and what it says is this, that a world government is going to be created. The word government actually appears as the first of three purposes of the new entity. The second purpose is the transfer of wealth from the countries of the West to third world countries in satisfaction of what is called coyly a climate debt, because we've been burning CO2 and they haven't, and we've been screwing up the climate. We haven't been screwing up the climate, but that's the line. And the third purpose of this new entity, this government, is enforcement. How many of you think that the word election or democracy or vote or ballot occurs anywhere in the 200 pages of that treaty? Quite right, it doesn't appear once. So at last, the communists who piled out of the Berlin Wall and into the environmental movement and took over Greenpeace, so that my friends who founded it left within a year because they'd captured it. Now the apotheosis is at hand. They are about to impose a communist world government on the world. You have a president who has very strong sympathies with that point of view. He's going to sign. He'll sign anything. He's a Nobel Peace Laureate. Of course he'll sign it. And the trouble is this. If that treaty is signed, your constitution says that it takes precedence over your constitution. And you can't resile from that treaty unless you get the agreement of all the other states parties. And because you'll be the biggest paying country, they're not going to let you out. So, thank you, America. You were the beacon of freedom for the world. It is a privilege merely to stand on this soil of freedom while it is still free. But in the next few weeks, unless you stop it, your president will sign your freedom, your democracy, and your prosperity away forever, and neither you nor any subsequent government you may elect will have any power whatsoever to take it back again. That is how serious it is. I have read the treaty. I've seen this stuff about government and climate debt and enforcement. They are going to do this to you, whether you like it or no. But I think it is here in your great nation, which I so love and I so admire. It is here that perhaps at this 11th hour, at the 59th minute and the 59th second, you will rise up and you will stop your president from signing that dreadful treaty, that purposeless treaty, for there is no problem with the climate, and even if there were, economically speaking, there's nothing we can do about it. So I end by saying to you the words that Winston Churchill addressed to your president in the darkest hour before the dawn of freedom in the Second World War. He quoted from your great poet Longfellow. "Sail on, O ship of state. Sail on, O Union, strong and great. Humanity, with all its fears, with all the hopes of future years, is hanging breathless on thy fate." Thank you.
I've been gardening in white gloves just to prove that dirt can't hide from new Tide. Tide's been intensified to bring you cleanness no other low-priced powder can beat. I'm going to hide these filthy gloves in the pockets of these cords. Too tough a test for a low-priced powder? Not for new Tide. Now for those hidden gloves. How's that for cleanness? Proof that dirt just can't hide from intensified Tide. Try it.
Big fries are coming by.
Yeah, yeah.
Big fry.
Here comes Big Fry with exotic Big Fry Turkish Delight. Full of Big Fry Eastern promise. Big Fry Turkish Delight.
'Cause big fries are coming by.
Big fry.
Getaway people get super national.
Once upon a time, there was a blonde.
And I used to spend a fortune with my hairdresser. Then, I married him. Blonde it yourself, he said one day. Get yourself a packet of wood nymph. Wood nymph, I said. Wood nymph, he said. It's a new kind of hair lightener. It's got 4 fine pale shades to choose from, and it's even got a thing to put it on with. So I did it. All by myself. Look out, I said. I might divorce you. When you've got wood nymph, who needs a hairdresser for a husband?
These are the in-touch people, the people who own London. They have fun, they have style, they're in touch. They start the trends, they pick the places, they make the shows. This is their handbook, London Life. This week, London Life gives a cool survey of what makes the cool scene. If your face fits, you could win a holiday in Hawaii. Every week, London Life keeps you in touch with dating, drinking, dancing, drama. Get in touch with London Life, the handbook for in-touch people. Out now.
I asked if I could sing about New Lux, but they said, no, just use your own words. Well, I think New Lux is fantastic and really new. It's got a new wrapper and a wonderful new perfume, just the kind I go for. But what's really marvellous about New Lux is the new silky lather. It seems more than just lather. It feels like a rich cream and leaves my complexion so soft and smooth. New Lux makes me feel beautiful all over, right down to my toes. Try it yourself. See how great it is.
Okay, next I want to play a series of short clips from a Channel 4 programme from the UK called The Great Global Warming Swindle. The full episode can be found online, and I will put links to that at the end of my broadcast, and you can make your own mind up, but it's over an hour long, and it's quite compelling. Anyway, here are the clips.
You imagine that we live in an age of reason, and the global warming alarm is dressed up as science, but it's not science, it's propaganda.
There's no direct evidence which links 20th century global warming to anthropogenic greenhouse gases.
We're just being told lies. That's what it comes down to.
You can't say that CO2 will drive climate. It certainly never did in the past.
If the CO2 increases in the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas, then the temperature will go up. But the ice core record shows exactly the opposite. So the fundamental assumption, the most fundamental assumption of the whole theory of climate change due to humans is shown to be wrong.
The whole thing stinks.
Man-made global warming is no longer just a theory about climate. It is the defining moral and political cause of our age. Campaigners say the time for debate is over. Any criticism, no matter how scientifically rigorous, is illegitimate, even worse, dangerous. But in this film, it will be shown that the Earth's climate is always changing, that there is nothing unusual about the current temperature, and that the scientific evidence does not support the notion that climate is driven by carbon dioxide, man-made or otherwise. Everywhere you are told that man-made climate change is proved beyond doubt, but you are being told lies.
When people say, well, you don't believe in global warming, I say, no, I believe in global warming. I don't believe that human CO2 is causing that warming.
A few years ago, if you would ask me, I would tell you it's CO2. Why? Because just like everyone else in the public, I listened to what the media had to say.
Each day, the news reports grow more fantastically apocalyptic. Politicians no longer dare to express any doubt about climate change.
There is such intolerance of any dissenting voice.
Are some of the worst climate criminals on the planet.
This is the most politically incorrect thing possible, is to doubt this climate change orthodoxy.
Global warming has gone beyond politics. It is a new kind of morality.
Now, the Prime Minister's back from his holidays, unrepentant and unembarrassed about yet another long-haul destination.
Yet, as the frenzy over man-made global warming grows shriller, many senior climate scientists say the actual scientific basis for the theory is crumbling.
There were periods, for example, in Earth's history when we had 3 times as much CO2 as we have today, or periods when we had 10 times as much CO2 as we have today. And if CO2 has a large effect on climate, then you should see it in the temperature reconstruction.
If we look at climate through the geological time frame, we would never suspect CO2 as a major climate driver.
None of the major climate changes in the last 1,000 years can be explained by CO2.
We can't say that CO2 will drive climate. It certainly never did in the past.
I've often heard it said that there is a consensus of thousands of scientists on the global warming issue and that humans are causing a catastrophic change to the climate system. Well, I am one scientist, and there are many that simply think that is not true.
Man-made global warming is no ordinary scientific theory.
This morning, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, made up of...
It is presented in the media as having the stamp of authority of an impressive international organization.
From the IPCC,
the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC.
The IPCC, like any UN body, is political. The final conclusion are politically driven.
This claim that the IPCC is the world's top 1,500 or 2,500 scientists, you look at the bibliographies of the people and it's simply not true. There are quite a number of non-scientists.
And to build the number up to 2,500, they have to start taking reviewers and government people and so on, anyone who ever came close to them. And none of them are asked to agree. Many of them disagree.
Those people who are specialists but don't agree with the polemic and resign, and there have been a number that I know of, they are simply put on the author list and become part of this 2,500 of the world's top scientists.
People have decided you have to convince other people that since no scientist disagrees, you shouldn't disagree either. But that, whenever you hear that in science, that's pure propaganda.
This is a story of how a theory about climate turned into a political ideology.
See, I don't even like to call it the environmental movement anymore because really it is a political activist movement, and they have become hugely influential at a global level.
It is the story of the distortion of a whole area of science.
Climate scientists need there to be a problem in order to get funding.
We have a vested interest in creating panic, because then money will flow to climate science.
There's one thing you shouldn't say, and that is, this might not be a problem.
It is the story of how a political campaign turned into a bureaucratic bandwagon.
Fact of the matter is that tens of thousands of jobs depend upon global warming right now. It's a big business.
It's become a great industry in itself. And if the whole global warming farrago collapsed, there'd be an awful lot of people out of jobs and looking for work.
This is a story of censorship and intimidation.
I have seen and heard their spitting fury at anybody who might disagree with them, which is not the scientific way.
It is a story about Westerners invoking the threat of climatic disaster to hinder vital industrial progress in the developing world.
One clear thing that emerges from the whole environmental debate is the point that there's somebody keen to kill the African dream, and the African dream is to develop.
The environmental movement has evolved into the strongest force there is for preventing development in the developing countries.
The global warming story is a cautionary tale of how a media scare became the defining idea of a generation.
The whole global warming business has become like a religion. And people who disagree are called heretics. I'm a heretic. The makers of this program are all heretics.
In 2005, a House of Lords inquiry was set up to examine the scientific evidence of man-made global warming. A leading figure in that inquiry was Lord Lawson of Blaby, who, as Chancellor of the Exchequer in the 1980s, was the first politician to commit government money to global warming research.
We had a very, very thorough inquiry, took evidence from a whole lot of people expert in this area and produced a report. What surprised me was to discover how weak and uncertain the science was. In fact, there are more and more thoughtful people, some of them a little bit frightened to come out in the open, but who quietly, privately, and some of them publicly, are saying, hang on, wait a minute, this simply doesn't add up.
We are told that the Earth's climate is changing. But the Earth's climate is always changing. In Earth's long history, there have been countless periods when it was much warmer and much cooler than it is today, when much of the world was covered by tropical forests or else vast ice sheets. The climate has always changed, and changed without any help from us humans. We can trace the present warming trend back at least 200 years, to the end of a very cold period in Earth's history. This cold spell is known to climatologists as the Little Ice Age.
Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. It doesn't show signs of stopping.
In the 14th century, Europe plunged into the Little Ice Age. And where we would look for evidence of this are the old illustrations and prints and pictures of Old Father Thames. Because during the hardest and toughest winters of that Little Ice Age, the Thames would freeze over. And there were wonderful ice fairs held on the Thames, skating and people actually selling things on the ice.
If we look back further in time, before the Little Ice Age, we find a balmy golden era, when temperatures were higher than they are today, a time known to climatologists as the medieval warm period.
It's important that people know that climate enabled a quite different lifestyle in the medieval period. We have this view today that warming is going to have apocalyptic outcomes. In fact, wherever you describe this warm period, it appears to be associated with riches.
We're having a heat wave.
In Europe, this was the great age of the cathedral builders, a time when, according to Chaucer, vineyards flourished even in the north of England.
All over the city of London, there are little memories of the vineyards that grew in the medieval warm period. So this was a wonderfully rich time. And this little church, in a sense, symbolizes it, because it comes from a period of great wealth.
Going back in time further still, before the medieval warm period, we find more warm spells, including a very prolonged period during the Bronze Age, known to geologists as the Holocene Maximum, when temperatures were significantly higher than they are now for more than 3 millennia.
Since the beginning of the production of this particular episode, I've done more research on the subject, and more and more it's become clear to me that climate change and Agenda 21 are linked so closely together that I've decided to combine episodes. So I'm probably going to do episode 1 and 2, climate change / Agenda 21, and I may or may not get everything in this episode, but I'll certainly get it in 2 episodes. So we'll carry on from here, and hopefully the information will be useful to you, and I think it will be informative to all of us. It'll be an edited down version of what's really available out there. And what I'm going to be doing is putting more information on my website about this topic, these topics combined, because they are clearly combined, and what effect it's having on this country, that is Canada, and the effect of this clear liberal communist prime minister that we have at the present time, and the way that he is destroying our infrastructure. He is destroying the oil patch community in Alberta. He is upsetting the voters of Alberta, and I think he's clearly setting up Canada for total destruction, which is probably inevitable if you analyse it, because bilingualism again is coming to the forefront. Quebec is stealing billions of dollars from us yet again, and Ontario's broke, and it's just ridiculous that we're paying out more money. And finally, just to add insult to injury, this is a relevant subject, quite honestly, is that in the last few days it has become clear that this Prime Minister has spent $1 billion, that's not 1 million, $1 billion on 25,000 refugees being relocated to Canada. He is planning to bring in over 250,000 refugees in the next few months. So I'll leave you to calculate how many billions of dollars that is, and why the Canadian dollar is going to tank, and we're all going to be in trouble. And that's if this is allowed even to be on the internet. If it's not, I'll get it on there some way, and I'll tell you about it somehow. But we won't be silenced about this. These liberal communists need to be stopped. They're traitors to Canada. They should be arrested and put in the equivalent of the Canadian Tower of London, as far as I'm concerned, and the key thrown away. I wouldn't execute them. I'd just have them in there for the rest of their lives as an example of why we can never again elect, and I do say elect, liberal communists to even a dog catcher. Stay tuned.
While man plans to reach the moon, have beings from outer space already landed on Earth? The Sunday Mirror tomorrow prints the strange story of Barney and Betty Hill. Did they actually see a spacecraft? Were they really taken aboard and examined by doctors from another world? The Hill story has baffled scientists and doctors. Judge the evidence for yourself. Read about their fantastic experience in tomorrow's Sunday Mirror.
for me, Jenny. Free on Saturday as well?
Well, I'm free every night with this.
What's the problem? Dandruff? I've got something new for that. Head and Shoulders.
Head and Shoulders? Oh, a shampoo. The ones I've tried never seem to do anything for my dandruff.
This is a new one, and it worked for me. Just use it regularly. Do try it.
Smells nice. Great lather. Great if it worked.
You look nice tonight. New sweater.
New hair, more like. I could never miss black before. Your Head and Shoulders really did work. So tonight's for free.
All right, I'll pay you double on Saturday.
Saturday? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm booked. With a fella.
I see. Well, just keep your head and your shoulders.
New from Procter & Gamble, Head and Shoulders, a dandruff shampoo that works.
You know, some people think Formica decorative laminate is difficult to apply. In fact, it's easier to apply than to say. Your handyman shop has it, and they'll cut it to size for you. Then you glue it on and finish it off. Just look at this. There, what a difference. And you can do lots of things around the house just as easily with Formica decorative laminate. And this is the sign to look for.
Palladium Girls prove Sarongster girdles with crossover panels let you move, keep you smooth. No matter how active you are, Sarongster's crossover panels let you move, keep you smooth.
This dreamy caftan is one of the gorgeous things
Wish I had 100
in Bond Street. Come and get carried away
Oh, yes.
at Phoenix.
Ooh. Woo!
Okay, this is a UK document which may or may not be an act. I'm not totally sure about that, as that is an act of Parliament. And it goes in the following. Headed 10. However, if you were to cut emissions by 80% by 2050, there will have to be major changes in how we use and generate energy. Energy efficiency will have to increase dramatically across all sectors. The oil and gas used to drive cars, heat buildings and power industry will in large part need to be replaced by electricity, sustainable bioenergy or hydrogen. Electricity will need to be decarbonised, whatever that means, through renewable and nuclear power, and the use of carbon capture and storage, CCS is the acronym for that. The electricity grid will be larger and smarter, balancing demand and supply. 11. But there are some major uncertainties. How far can we reduce demand? Will sustainable biomass, whatever that is, be scarce or abundant? To what extent will electrification occur across transport and heating? Will wind, CCS or nuclear be the cheapest method, or generating large-scale, low-carbon electricity? How far can aviation, shipping, industry and agriculture be decarbonised? 12. The sectorial plans of this document seek to steer a course through this uncertainty. 13. In the next decade, the UK will complete the installation of proven cost-effective technologies that are worth installing under all future scenarios. All cavity walls, lofts in homes where practicable are expected to be insulated by 2020. The fuel efficiency of internal combustion engine cars will improve dramatically, with CO2 emissions from new cars set to fall by around a third. Many of our existing coal power stations will close. There you go. replaced primarily by gas and renewables. More efficient buildings and cars cut fuel costs. More diverse sources of electricity will improve energy security and reduce exposure to fossil fuel imports and price spikes. The UK is not alone in taking action on energy efficiency. Japan has set a goal of improving its energy consumption from the 2003 levels by at least 30% in 2030. The Swedish government has proposed an energy efficiency target to reduce energy by 20% between 2008 and 2020 in 2024.
Comes Big Fry with exotic Big Fry Turkish Delight, full of Big Fry Eastern promise. Big Fry Turkish Delight.
'Cause big fries are coming by. Big Fry.
People get super national.
Once upon a time, there was a blonde.
And I used to spend a fortune with my hairdresser. Then, I married him. Blonde it yourself, he said one day. Get yourself a packet of wood nymph. Wood nymph, I said. Wood nymph, he said. It's a new kind of hair lightener. It's got 4 fine pale shades to choose from, and it's even got a thing to put it on with. So I did it. All by myself. Look out, I said. I might divorce you. When you've got wood nymph, who needs a hairdresser for a husband?
These are the in-touch people, the people who own London. They have fun, they have style, they're in touch. They start the trends, they pick the places, they make the shows. This is their handbook, London Life. This week, London Life gives a cool survey of what makes the cool scene. If your face fits, you could win a holiday in Hawaii. Every week, London Life keeps you in touch with dating, drinking, dancing, drama. Get in touch with London Life, the handbook for in-touch people. Out now.
I asked if I could sing about New Lux, but they said, no, just use your own words. Well, I think New Lux is fantastic and really new. It's got a new wrapper and a wonderful new perfume, just the kind I go for. But what's really marvellous about New Lux is the new silky lather. It seems more than just lather. It feels like a rich cream and leaves my complexion so soft and smooth. New Lux makes me feel beautiful all over, right down to my toes. Try it yourself. See how great it is.
There was a blonde.
And I used to spend a fortune with my hairdresser. Then, I married him. Blonde it yourself, he said one day. Get yourself a packet of wood nymph. Wood nymph, I said.
This is a short article from the UK, from whatsupwiththat.com, and it's by Paul Homewood, And it's basically a short rebuttal from what's been said there on the UK Energy Government document. I have previously looked at the potential costs of Climate Change Act, for instance here, and that he points to a chart which it can be seen on the website, and I will put the link to that. But now I want you to look at potential impact on energy supply. Let's start with the basic targets that have been set by emissions reduction. The Act commits to reducing greenhouse gases by 80% from 1990 levels by 2050. 5-year carbon budgets are set to plan in more detail how this can be achieved, and currently they are in force up to 2027. Although the first budget for 2008-12 already shows a saving of 23%, most of this occurred long before the Act, and partly because of a mass switch from coal to gas-fired electricity during the 1990s. And because of that, there's a final aspect to it, partly because of a decline also in UK manufacturing. The fourth budget demands further reduction of 35% from 2008-2012 levels. So, even under the best case, there is a hole of 121 terawatts to fill, and the reason I talk about that is that there is a chart to show what the actual usage is going to be and how it's broken down into coal usage, gas usage, hydro of various types, and where there's a shortfall as the environment grows, the economy grows, the population grows, the usage for electricity still grows, even though there's savings. But there's far more information on this website that you need to take into account. But this is an abbreviated version of it. So anyway, back to the text. About 1/3 of electricity currently generated in the UK, and logically this can only come from wind or solar. What I'm saying here is that there's a chart to be seen on this gentleman's website, which I will put a link to on my website, and it's talking about the fact that 121 terawatts of electricity are actually required in future calculations, and this can't really be generated purely by wind and solar, so they really haven't thought this through. And he goes on to say, solar can be ignored as it makes such a small contribution currently and simply is not reliable. But what about wind? To produce 121 terawatts of wind from even the best scenario would be a 6-fold increase on current levels, an increase of 102 terawatts in the last 3 years of wind has increased by 3 terawatts per year. So at this rate, it would take 34 years to build up to 121 terawatts of electricity, terawatt per hour electricity. Increased by 3 terawatt hours per year. So at this rate, it would take 34 years to build up to 121 terawatt hours. On the most likely case, we would need an extra 16 terawatt hours added each year. For something like that appears to be totally unrealistic. Then, of course, there is the question of backup capacity. Wind often operates at less than 10% of its nameplate capacity. So in practice, most of the 121 terawatt hours or 282 terawatt hours will be needed to match up an equivalent amount of backup capacity, in other words, gas. Unless we are prepared for the spare capacity required on the grid to be cut to a dangerous level, there would need to be at least a doubling of gas capacity, all to be left idly spinning when the wind blows. And this all assumes the best case. Under the most likely scenario, we appear to be entering la-la land, he says. Energy from wind will only need to multiply 19-fold, and all in the space of 10 years or so. And to back that up, we need to quadruple the current capacity of gas-fired power stations that generate electricity, and not be prepared to put down this capacity without being generously paid for the privilege. The energy bill includes provisions for a capacity market mechanism, which is basically a way of paying people, which will offer compensation, there you go, to be paid for by customers. Whether even that will be enough to procure the long-term investment required remains doubtful. Either way, consumers look forward to a massively increased bills and energy rationing. Boy, oh boy, doesn't that sound like Canada, folks? Okay, I'm sorry we had to go through that long what I call a diatribe, but it's basically pointing out to you that the goals and aspirations of these people are totally unrealistic. And unless the only way that they can achieve these goals is, I'm going to shock you now, by culling the population. That's the only way that these figures work. And that's, believe it or not, that's also in Agenda 21, a major depopulation of the world, not just one country, the world. So that's more to think about, isn't it? Anyway, we'll be right back after this, and we'll continue. Thank you. Okay, this is an article in the, it was originally published in the Spectator magazine, and I will put the link on the website at the end of the broadcast. This is entitled Meet the Man Who Exposed the Great Climate Change Contrick, and it's by James Dillingpole, who talks to Professor Ian Pilmer, the Australian geologist, whose new book shows the anthropogenic global warming is a dangerous, ruinous, expensive fiction, a first world luxury with no basis in scientific fact. So James Dillingpole writes, imagine how wonderful the world would be if the man-made global warming was just a figment of Al Gore's imagination. No more ugly wind farms to darken our sunlit uplands. No more whooping electricity bills, artificially inflated by EU-imposed carbon taxes. No longer any need to treat each warm sunny day as though it was some terrible harbinger of ecological doom. And definitely no need for $7.4 trillion cap-and-trade carbon bill, the largest tax in American history, which President Obama and his cohorts are so arduously trying to impose on the US economy. So he goes on to say, so go on then, Professor, what makes you sure that you're right and all those scientists out there saying the opposite are wrong? And his response is, I'm a geologist. We geologists have always recognized that climate change changes over time. Where we differ from a lot of people is pushing the AGW, is, in our own words, understanding of the scale. They're only interested in the last 150 years, but our time frame is considerably longer, 4,500 million years. So what they're doing is equivalent to trying to extrapolate the plot of the movie Casablanca from a tiny bit of a love scene, and you can't. It doesn't work. What Heaven and Earth sets out to do, that's his book, is to restore a sense of scientific perspective to a debate which has been hijacked by politicians, environmental activists and opportunists. It points out, for example, that the polar ice has been present on Earth for less than 20% of geological time, that extinctions of life are normal, that climate changes are cyclical and random, and that CO2 in the atmosphere to which human activity contributes the tiniest fraction is actually only 0.001% of the total CO2 held in the oceans, surface rocks, air, soils and life, that CO2 is not a pollutant but a plant food, that the Earth's warmer periods, such as when the Romans grew grapes and citrus trees as far north as Hadrian's Wall, were times of wealth and plenty. Does he really believe his message? Will he ever get through to, that's the professor? If you'd asked any scientist or doctor 30 years ago where stomach ulcers come from, they would all have given the same answer. Obviously it comes from acid brought on by too much stress. All of them apart from two scientists who were pilloried at the time for a crazy wacko theory that it was caused by bacteria. In 2005, they won the Nobel Prize and the consensus was wrong. His conclusion is that science is not set. There's far more of this article that you can read online, and I will put a link to it at the end of the broadcast. Is Ian Pilmer's Heaven and Earth, Global Warming, The Missing Science, is published by Quartet, and it's £25 in the UK. Okay, we're going to take a break there, and I will come back with some thoughts on the subject and what's coming up next. This is A Radio. Well, welcome back, and I'd like to bring you some closing thoughts tonight. Well, I think that you would agree that there is a lot of information packed into this program. We started off listening to Lord Monckton. You heard from Lord Monckton and what the UN was up to with global warming and climate change and their latest involvement of that. After that, you heard from a very well-respected TV channel in the UK that produced a really top-notch documentary. The channel was Channel 4, The Great Global Warming Conspiracy, of which they cover in far more detail than I can, and their broadcast and the people are very reputable people. You heard excerpts from a Professor Ian Plimer, I think his name was, an Australian geologist, and he was very, very clear about his views and how it was being controlled by multinationals and governments. You also heard from Paul Homewood, I gave an extract of that, the UK Climate Change Act and its implications on energy. You also heard me read out a document which was the British government's document on carbon tax, climate change and how they were going to deal with it. You heard how ridiculous the UK targets for CO2 were and the effect that it would have on that country, let alone Canada, how unachievable those energy targets are from non-fossil fuel supplies. More importantly, you heard how now it was linked to the UN, and the aspect that brings up is just terrifying in terms of how much lack of control that people have. There is a clear pattern developing here as far as I'm concerned, and there can only be one conclusion, that this science is not set. And while we continue to gather data, we can only extrapolate on the data that we have. And that only goes back a few hundred years, not tens of thousands of years. So can we really afford to fundamentally change our way of life, which will result in no difference in world temperature? And a lot of people have determined that is likely to be the case. But so changing the way of life, the way we live, the way we do things from the ground up, but have the effect of changing the growth of knowledge and technology. So we won't go forward, we won't improve things, and this could go on for 100 years. I feel, and no one else has said this, but this could be our modern day dark ages, as I say, could last 100 years. And as I said earlier, we're going to try and put all this together. We tried to put all this together in one program, but I think you would agree it's almost impossible to squeeze this into one program. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold some of the information over to the next broadcast, and in that next broadcast we will explore what Agenda 21 is and how it affects every one of us, right down to the local level, and how it's being interpreted at the local level, and how federal officials, the example that I have, and of course there's very few in this country, and how the federal officials in the United States deny its even existence. That's on our next broadcast. I hope you enjoyed this fun-packed edition. There was a lot to take in, so if you downloaded it, then play it back again several times and try and take it all in. Take a look at the links. Do your own research. Don't look at the ones linked to mainstream media, because they will deny any of this has ever happened. Do your research, check it out. As I say, that we will be doing another podcast on this, a broadcast shortly. Remains for me to do today is to thank you for joining me, and you can reach the information that I'm going to be putting on the website at changeontario, all one word, .wix.com/change. We're also available at Change Ontario on Twitter. The Facebook link can be found at the website, and the email address, as always, is changeontario@outlook.com. Change Ontario is all one word. Please look out for our next broadcast, and if you like what you hear, let us know. Until next time, good night and God bless. Good night, everybody. Good night.